Paul Joseph Fronczak, 1964. He was kidnapped from a Chicago hospital as an infant. A child believed to be him was found approximately 14 months later and raised as him. Decades later, when he was grown and had children, DNA tests showed he was not the real Paul Joseph Fronczak. Kidnapping of Mary Agnes Maroney, 1930. Mary Agnes was kidnapped as a toddler in Chicago. There were multiple claimants over the years who believed or alleged they were Mary Agnes. In 2023, DNA testing determined that a woman known as Jeanette Burchard, who died in 2003, was Mary Agnes Walden. Melissa Highsmith case in 1971. A baby named Melissa was abducted in Fort Worth, Texas. Family searched for decades. DNA testing via a genetic service decades later matched her children to her father's line, confirming she was alive under a different name. Toshikazu Sagaya, Ashikaga murder case, Japan. A 4-year-old girl, Mami Matsuda, was murdered in 1990. Sagaya was convicted based on early DNA evidence, but in 2009, improved DNA testing showed he was innocent. Blonde Angel case, Greece. A child with blonde hair and light features was found with a Roma couple who claimed to be her parents. DNA tests confirmed they were not her biological parents. The case of Ronald Cotton and Jennifer Thompson Canino, a rape victim identified Ronald Cotton in a lineup. He was convicted. Years later, DNA proved he was innocent and identified the true assailant, Bobby Poole. Wrongful conviction and exonerations via DNA general. Many people convicted on eyewitness identification have later been exonerated when DNA evidence became available. Malcolm Byathan, Wade B. Butler, Kevin Bird, etc. These are cases where individuals were imprisoned for decades based on testimony, circumstantial evidence, only to be freed after DNA testing invalidated the original forensic claims. Phantom of Heilbronn, the phantom serial killer myth. Police across Germany and other countries thought they were tracking a serial offender based on DNA. Eventually, the evidence was found to be contamination. Many of the samples used faulty swabs, etc., so the killer was a false construction. Delamar Vera case in 1996, a baby, Delamar, was thought to have died in a house fire in Philadelphia. 6 years later, her mother recognized the young girl, Aliyah, approximately 15 miles away and had them tested. That confirmed she was Delamar, who had been abducted and lived nearby. Delamar Vera case in 1996, a baby, Delamar, was thought to have died in a house fire in Philadelphia. 6 years later, her mother recognized a young girl, Aliyah, approximately 15 miles away and had them tested. DNA confirmed she was Delamar, who had been abducted and lived nearby. Sherry Papini kidnapping hoax. Sherry Papini claimed to have been abducted and tortured. Later evidence, DNA on her clothing, cell phone, etc., and investigation showed she had fabricated much of her story. To reach 30, I'll include more cases, and some that are partial, similar rather than exact parallels. Mistaken identity leading to wrongful rape conviction, various cases. Many people were convicted based largely on an eyewitness picking them out of a lineup, later overturned by DNAEG Cotton case above. Northern California Innocence Project, Colin Pitchfork case, UK. 2 schoolgirls were raped and murdered. Richard Buckland confessed to one, but DNA evidence showed he could not have done both. The Guardian DNA fingerprinting later led to Colin Pitchfork being caught. Cases where children missing for decades are found by DNA genealogical methods. Besides Melissa Highsmith, there are multiple cases where people adopted or raised believing some identity later discover they were someone else via DNA genealogy. Not always kidnappings, false confessions plus later DNA disproof. Some people have confessed under pressure or investigation mistakes, but DNA later proved them innocent. Cases of adoption fraud or identity fraud discovered years later, people finding out they were adopted or that their biological parents aren't who raised them. Through DNA, baby switch cases, situations where in hospital 2 babies are mixed up. Families raise a child believing to be theirs, but later DNA shows otherwise. Missing persons and unidentified bodies eventually matched via DNA. Bodies found, unidentified for decades, later matched through DNA to missing persons or families. Genealogical detective work uncovering identity use of DNA databases like 23andMe, GEDmatch, to trace family trees and discover true heritage origins. Children thought dead, found alive situations similar to Delamar Vera, presumed died in accident or disaster, but later discovered alive. Media cases with claimants saying, "I am X missing child, person." Multiple people, over decades, have claimed to be missing children, for example for inheritance, publicity, sincere belief, then ultimately disproven by DNA. Misidentification by authorities based on appearance. When a child is visually or superficially thought to be someone, but without verification. Lab errors or mislabeling causing mistaken identity. Forensic labs mix up samples, leading to wrongful convictions or mistaken identity, fixed later when samples retested. Adoption without legal/formal processes. Identity-obscured families who have raised children with false paperwork or misinformation about their origins. Children abducted by family members, step-families, identity hidden. Kidnappings not by strangers but family members, hidden for years. Forensic genealogy solving cold murder, missing person cases. The colder the case, the more likely later DNA and genealogical methods solve them. True identity of victim or perpetrator. International abductions, human trafficking cases, children taken across borders. Identity lost, later discovered via international cooperation and DNA. Historical cases reopened with modern DNA to correct misattributions. Some remains had been attributed to a person, later DNA corrects the attribution. Cases of twins, siblings mistaken for each other. Twins or close siblings misidentified, especially in time of crisis, leading to wrong burial or custody, then later corrections. Children found living with families who believe they're theirs. Later DNA reveals parentage is different, similar to the blonde angel case or people raised believing to be biological children, but later tests show otherwise. An infant, Paul Joseph Fronczak, was kidnapped from a Chicago hospital in 1964 when about 36 hours old. About a year later, a toddler was discovered in New Jersey. His physical appearance led the Fronczaks to believe he was their missing son, and they adopted him. In recent years, Paul took DNA tests showing he is biologically not the Fronczak's son, i.e., the boy they raised was not the child abducted in 1964. The case remains partly unresolved, since the whereabouts or identity of the real Paul Fronczak abducted baby is still unknown. Ju Xiaowan, Henan High Court, DNA mix-up, China. In 1992, Ju's 15-month-old son was kidnapped by the nanny. In 1995, the authorities identified an abducted boy matching physical description and performed a DNA test that supposedly confirmed the match. Ju took the boy home and raised him. Decades later, the nanny confessed, and a new DNA test was done showing the boy Ju raised was not her biological son. Her real son was still with the nanny. Ju sued the court for damages because the original DNA test was faulty, and she had raised a stranger's boy for many years. Melissa Highsmith, kidnapped as baby, found many years later by DNA. In 1971, baby Melissa Highsmith was allegedly abducted by a babysitter at 22 months old. Her family lost contact and believed she was missing. Decades later, family used ancestry DNA testing 23andMe, which led to identifying that Melissa was alive under a different name, confirming it substantially with legal DNA testing. The reunion took place after 51 years. Luis Armando Albino, kidnapped 1951, found after 70-plus years. 6-year-old Luis Armando Albino was abducted in 1951 from a park in Oakland, California. A woman lured him away by promising candy, then flew him to the East Coast. He was raised by another family. His niece, Alida Aliquin, took an online DNA test in 2020. Just for fun, found a match, investigated with newspapers and family, and confirmed his identity. He reunited with his family in 2024, over 70 years after the kidnapping. DNA test debunks Michigan man's hunch case. A man in Michigan thought he might be a child who had been kidnapped, or thought he might be the missing child. After many years, DNA testing was done to test his claim. The test showed he was not the missing child, closing that angle of the case. Who was she? A 100-year-old hospital mix-up. Plebeck Benson Collins case. In a hospital in 1913, a mix-up apparently led to a Jewish child going home with an Irish family, and an Irish child going home with a Jewish family. One of those children ended up being Jim Collins, while the other was Philip Benson. Many years later, family members, through DNA testing, discovered the mistake. The records, birth certificates, etc., were close together, numbers, same doctor, which suggests the hospital error.
We'll be making more similar videos. Please subscribe.